They were sitting so still, they could have been a photograph. Three little girls on a park bench at dawn, matching dresses, mismatched shoes, and a bright red suitcase that screamed danger in a way nothing else did. Henry Luovano had cleaned up after people his entire life, but he'd never seen a mess like this one. And when the smallest girl looked up at him and whispered, "Mommy went to get pancakes," he knew two things for certain. She was lying, and he was about to walk into something that would cost him everything. Before we dive into this story, kindly tell me in the comment where you are watching from. You know that feeling when you see something wrong, not dramatic wrong, just off, like a jacket left on a playground after dark or mail piling up behind a locked door? That's what stopped Henry that morning. Not the early hour. Not the cold drizzle sliding down the back of his coveralls. Just 3 pairs of mismatched shoes swinging above wet concrete. 3 blonde ponytails identical, 3 floral dresses cinched with raspberry ribbons, and that candy red suitcase planted between them like a stop sign nobody obeyed. Before I tell you what he found inside that suitcase, let me ask you this. If you saw 3 children alone before sunrise with nowhere to go, would you stop? Or would you keep walking like the joggers who passed them without a glance? Stay to the end, because what happened next didn't just change their lives. It shocked the entire world. Henry was 41, a night shift school janitor who knew the weight of mop handles and the architecture of loss. He'd buried his wife 3 years earlier and learned to raise his 8-year-old son alone, which meant he understood silence the way some people understood language. He came to this park every morning on his walk home, cutting through before the neighborhood woke up, using the stillness to clear his head. The last thing he needed was trouble. But as he got closer, the middle girl lifted her chin and met his eyes with a look far too knowing for someone so small. That's when the youngest confirmed what his gut already knew. "Mommy went to get pancakes." Henry knelt, the damp pavement soaking through his work pants. "How long ago, sweetheart?" The oldest girl, maybe 6 years old, shrugged in that way children do when they're pretending time doesn't scare them. "She said to wait right here. She said not to bother anyone." Not to bother anyone. The words landed like stones. Behind them, the playground equipment dripped quietly. Sprinklers hissed to life across the grass. The sky hung low and gray, threatening more rain. Everything looked ordinary until you noticed the details. The girls' matching dresses were stained at the hems. Their shoes, all different sizes, scuffed and worn. Around one girl's wrist was a faded paper hospital band. Around another's, a second band from a different facility. The ink smudged but still visible. The third girl had a matching bracelet made of frayed embroidery thread, pink and white beads arranged in a pattern she kept tracing with her thumb. Between them sat that bright red suitcase, travel stickers peeling at the corners. On the handle, someone had tied a laminated card with clear packing tape. In black marker, it read, "If found, do not involve media." Henry picked it up slowly. His hands had cleaned 1,000 forgotten messes, scrubbed floors nobody thanked him for, fixed things everyone else walked past. But this was different. "What's your name?" he asked the oldest. "Francis," she said, then pointed. "That's Carolyn, that's Sharon. 3 names, 3 identical faces, 3 separate hospital bands." "Have you eaten?" Carolyn's voice was barely a whisper. "We had crackers yesterday." Henry exhaled, his breath misting in the cold. He had a choice, the kind you don't forget making. He could call someone and walk away. He could leave money and let the system sort it out. Or he could stay. His son's face flashed in his mind, small and trusting, The way he'd looked the morning after his mother died when Henry promised him, "I won't leave you alone." These girls were somebody's daughters too. "All right," Henry said gently. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm calling some people who can help. People whose job it is to keep kids safe. And while we wait, how about we get you something warm? There's a diner right across the street. You can see this bench from the window. If your mama comes back, she'll know exactly where to find you." Sharon clutched her sister's hand. "She said don't move." "I know," Henry said. "But rules change when you're cold and hungry. The most important rule right now is that you're not alone anymore." Francis studied him, the way children do when they've learned not to trust easily. "Do you have ID?" Henry blinked, then slowly pulled out his school badge. "Henry Luovano, custodian at Monroe Elementary. That's where I just came from." He pointed to the faded name stitched on his coveralls. "See? Same name." She read it twice, her lips moving silently. Only then did she nod. Francis lifted the red suitcase. It looked almost as big as she was, and Henry reached to take it. It was disturbingly light. Inside the diner, the fluorescent lights felt too bright after the gray dawn. Henry ordered hot chocolate and scrambled eggs while the girls sat pressed together in the booth, their eyes tracking every movement around them. As they ate, they spoke in careful half-sentences, the kind that revealed more than they hid. They'd been at the park a little while. They knew how to stay quiet. They remembered being told to wait where the camera could see them. "Why didn't you ask anyone for help?" Henry asked softly. Frances set down her fork. "Mommy said if we were good and didn't make noise, she'd come back faster." Henry had no answer for that. Somewhere between the clink of silverware and the hum of the diner's old jukebox, something shifted in him. He thought of his wife's last words. "Take care of our boy. Take care of each other." He thought of every training session at the school about mandated reporting, about what to do when a child seems at risk. He thought about the paper wristband still circling Sharon's arm and the laminated warning on the suitcase handle. Then Carolyn reached into the red suitcase and pulled out a prepaid flip phone, cheap and anonymous. "Mommy left this," she said. "She said if we got scared, we should call Grandma." Henry turned the phone over in his hands. There was only one contact saved. Just a single word. Grandma. Francis leaned forward. "Mommy said Grandma would know what to do." Henry looked out the window at the bench where he'd found them, at the city camera mounted on the light pole above it, its lens dark and watching. He thought about the hospital bands and the warning label and 3 little girls who'd learned to be invisible. "Then let's call her," he said quietly. "And then I'm calling the police. Because no matter what your mama said, you 3 are going to be safe now. That's a promise." Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. A jogger passed the bench without looking. A dog walker hurried by. The camera on the pole blinked its red light once, twice, recording everything and nothing, a silent witness to the moment that would unravel a billionaire's empire and prove that the smallest act of stopping, of kneeling, of staying, could change the world. By the time Child Protective Services arrived, Henry had already made 3 calls. The first to 911, the second to his son's babysitter to say he'd be late. The third to the number saved in the flip phone, the one labeled Grandma, where a clipped, cold voice answered and said 6 words that made his blood run cold. "Leave them by the camera and walk away." He'd hung up. He'd called the police again, and now, standing in that bright diner with 3 little girls who'd been taught to disappear, Henry Luovano understood something money had never taught the people who abandoned them. Some promises you keep not because they're easy, but because they remind you what it means to be human. What he didn't know yet was that the grandmother on that phone, the woman who'd tried to buy his silence before they'd ever met, was Evelyn Armitage, one of the richest and most ruthless women in America. And what she didn't know was that a night shift janitor with scuffed work boots and a dead wife's memory was about to become the one person she couldn't intimidate, couldn't buy, and couldn't make disappear. The camera kept recording. The rain kept falling. And somewhere in the machinery of power and law and family secrets, the first domino began to tip. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. The kind of place where fluorescent lights hummed too loud and time moved in forms instead of minutes. Henry sat in a plastic chair outside interview room 3, his coveralls still damp from the morning rain, watching through the small window as 2 officers carefully laid out the contents of the red suitcase on a metal table. Francis, Carolyn, and Sharon sat in a row on the opposite side, their matching dresses wrinkled now, their hands folded in identical poses. A woman from Child Protective Services, mid-40s with kind eyes and a tired smile, knelt beside them trying to coax answers to questions they'd already learned not to answer. "Can you tell me your last name, sweetheart?" she asked Francis. Francis looked at her sisters. Carolyn traced the beads on her bracelet. Sharon stared at the suitcase. "It's okay," the CPS worker said softly. "You're safe here." Safe. The word hung in the air like a promise nobody could guarantee. Through the window, Henry watched the officers pull items from the suitcase one by one, logging each in careful script. 3 small nightgowns, pink and worn at the seams. A tangle of charger cords knotted together like they'd been packed in a hurry. A Ziploc bag with granola bars, half eaten. And that prepaid flip phone, cheap plastic with a single contact saved. One of the officers held up the laminated card tied to the suitcase handle, reading it aloud to his partner. "If found, do not involve media." He looked up, frowning. What kind of mother writes that? The kind who knows someone's watching, Henry thought. The kind who's running. The CPS worker emerged from the interview room, clipboard tucked under her arm. She offered Henry a weary smile. "Mr. Luovano, right? The custodian who found them?" "Yes, ma'am. You did the right thing calling it in." She glanced back at the girls through the window. "Most people just keep walking." Henry said nothing. Through the glass, Sharon had turned to look at him, her small face pressed close to the window, checking to make sure he was still there. "We'll take it from here," the CPS worker continued. "You've given your initial statement. We may need to follow up in a few days, but for now, you're free to go. I'm sure you're exhausted." He was. Bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with mopping floors all night. But when he stood to leave, all 3 girls turned toward the door, their eyes tracking his movement like they'd been abandoned one too many times to believe anyone stayed. Henry hesitated. "Can I say goodbye?" The worker nodded, opening the door. He crouched in front of them, meeting them at eye level, the way he did with his own son when something important needed saying. "Listen to me. These people are going to take good care of you. Better than I can. They know what to do, and they're not going to leave you alone." "You're leaving?" Francis asked. And the crack in her voice was so small it nearly broke him. "I have to go home to my boy," Henry said gently. "But I'll check on you, I promise." Carolyn reached out and grabbed his sleeve, her fingers clutching the fabric. "You called Grandma?" Henry glanced at the officer holding the flip phone, then back at Carolyn. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we will." The officer stepped forward, extending the phone. Actually, Mr. Luovano, since you've been the primary contact, would you mind making the call now? It might help us understand the situation faster. Henry took the phone, its weight somehow heavier than it should have been. He found the single saved contact, Grandma, and pressed dial. It rang twice. Then a woman's voice answered, clipped and cold, the kind of voice that gave orders and expected them obeyed. "Who is this?" "My name is Henry Luovano. I'm at the police station with 3 little girls who say you're their grandmother. They were left alone in... Where exactly are you?" Henry gave the precinct address. There was a pause, the sound of fingers on a keyboard. "Mr. Luovano, I need you to listen very carefully. Leave the girls by the front desk and walk away. Cash will be delivered to you within the hour, 5 figures. This matter does not concern you." The words came so smooth, so practiced, that Henry almost didn't register what she was saying. Almost. "Ma'am, these children were abandoned. They were not abandoned. They were placed strategically for retrieval. You have complicated a delicate family situation. Remove yourself, and you will be compensated." Henry looked at Francis, at Carolyn, at Sharon, all watching him with eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. "No," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said no. If you want these girls, you come down here yourself and you explain to the police why they were sitting alone in a park at dawn with hospital bracelets on their wrists." He hung up. The officer stared at him. The CPS worker's mouth had fallen open slightly. And in the silence that followed, Henry felt something his wife used to say echo in his mind. Keep helping where it hurts, even when it costs you. Especially then. He'd been 23 when she'd whispered those words in a hospital room, her hand cold in his, machines beeping their countdown. He'd promised her he would. Promised he'd raise their son with that kind of spine. And now, looking at 3 little girls who'd been treated like packages to be moved and hidden, he understood that some promises outlive the people who make you swear them. 2 hours later, the station's front doors swung open. 3 black SUVs idled at the curb, engines purring, windows tinted dark. And stepping through the entrance in a sharp gray coat that probably cost more than Henry made in 6 months was a woman in her early 60s. Silver hair pulled back tight, heels clicking against the linoleum like gavels. She walked straight to the front desk, ignoring everyone else in the lobby. "My name is Evelyn Armitage," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that moved boardrooms and bent politicians. "CEO of Armitage Freight Holdings. Those 3 girls in your custody are my granddaughters. I'm here to take them home." Behind her, 2 men in expensive suits entered, briefcases in hand. And Henry, still sitting in that plastic chair, still in his damp coveralls, realized the mess he'd walked into that morning wasn't just big. It was the kind that swallowed people whole. The press arrived before Henry even realized someone had called them. Camera flashes exploded through the precinct's glass doors like lightning trapped indoors. Reporters shouting questions over each other, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Henry stood near the curb, still clutching the flip phone, watching Evelyn Armitage move through the chaos with the ease of someone who'd orchestrated it herself. She didn't flinch at the cameras, didn't slow her stride, just walked with her lawyers flanking her like Secret Service, her expression carved from stone and money. "Miss Armitage, is it true these are your granddaughters? What happened to their mother? How long were they missing?" She stopped at the top of the precinct steps, turned, and delivered a single line with surgical precision. "This is a private family matter. Thank you for respecting our privacy during this difficult time." Then she disappeared inside, leaving the press to devour her words like scraps. Henry's stomach turned. Private family matter. The girls had been left in a public park for anyone to find. And now this woman wanted privacy? Inside, the station had transformed into something that felt more like a corporate negotiation than a child welfare case. Evelyn's lawyers had taken over interview room 1, spreading documents across the table in neat rows, while the precinct captain and CPS supervisor reviewed them with furrowed brows. Henry watched through the glass as one attorney slid a folder forward. "Hospital discharge papers," he heard someone say. "Genetic testing results. Custody documentation from a family court in Connecticut. Everything official. Everything airtight." The CPS supervisor looked up, troubled but cornered. "These appear to be in order." "Of course they are," Evelyn said smoothly. "My daughter has struggled with instability for years. We've been trying to help her, but she's refused treatment. When she took the girls and disappeared 3 weeks ago, I filed the appropriate legal motions. The court granted me emergency custody pending a full hearing. 3 weeks. Henry's jaw tightened. The girls had said their mother went to get pancakes. They'd been trained to lie, even to the people trying to help them. "Where's their mother now?" the captain asked. "We don't know," Evelyn said. And something in her voice suggested she didn't care. "Which is precisely why I need to take my granddaughters somewhere safe while we locate her." One of her lawyers produced another document. "We're prepared to provide round-the-clock care, private medical evaluation, and full cooperation with any ongoing investigation." It was all so neat, so rehearsed, like a script written by people who bought outcomes instead of earned them. The CPS supervisor sighed, clearly exhausted. "We'll need to interview the children first, but if everything checks out..." "Ms. Armitage." Henry hadn't meant to speak, hadn't planned to insert himself into a room full of lawyers and officials and people with power he'd never have. But the words came anyway, carried on instinct and the memory of 3 little girls clinging to his sleeve. Evelyn turned, noticing him for the first time. Her eyes swept over his coveralls, his work boots, the name stitched above his chest pocket, and dismissed him in the span of a heartbeat. "And you are?" "Henry Luovano. I'm the one who found your granddaughters this morning." "Then you have my gratitude." She opened her purse, pulled out a leather checkbook, and began writing with smooth, practiced strokes. When she finished, she tore the check free and held it out to him. "For your trouble." Henry looked down at the number. 6 figures. More money than he'd make in 3 years of mopping floors and fixing broken things. He slid it back across the table. "You can't pay people to look away," he said quietly. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or calculation. Her lead attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Luovano, we understand you want what's best for the children. To expedite their return to family care, we're prepared to offer you a standard non-disclosure agreement. Simple formality. Sign, and we can move forward quickly." Henry stared at the paper the lawyer pushed toward him. Standard formality. Just like the check. Just like the press conference. Everything designed to make him disappear. "If this is safe," Henry said slowly, "why the silence?" No one answered. The CPS supervisor shifted uncomfortably. The captain crossed his arms. And Evelyn Armitage smiled, thin and cold as January ice. Mr. Luovano, I admire your concern, but you've done your part. These are my family, my responsibility. You can go home now. Henry left the room, but he didn't go home. He sat in the station lobby, the flip phone still in his pocket, watching through windows as Evelyn's team continued their efficient dismantling of every obstacle between her and the girls. Frances, Carolyn, and Sharon were still in the break room with a child advocate, drinking juice boxes and coloring on scrap paper, unaware that the machinery of wealth was grinding toward them. Then the phone buzzed. Henry pulled it out, staring at the screen. One new voicemail. Number unknown. He pressed play, holding the phone to his ear. The voice was a woman's, breathless and scared. Words tumbling over each other like she was running out of time. If you found them, if someone found my girls, please don't trust my mother. She'll have papers, she'll have lawyers, she'll make it look legitimate. But she's the reason I ran. Keep them safe until morning. I'm coming back, I swear. But I'm being followed and I can't. Static crackled. Background noise bled through, station announcements, garbled and distant. Then a sound Henry recognized from 1,000 maintenance calls near the train yards. The deep, mournful horn of a freight train. Its pattern unmistakable. 2 long blasts, one short, one long. I have to go, the woman whispered. Please, just until morning. The line went dead. Henry sat frozen, the phone pressed against his ear long after the message ended. Marina Armitage. It had to be. And she wasn't asking for help because she was unstable. She was asking because she was terrified. He replayed the voicemail, this time focusing on the background. The train horn sounded again, that same pattern cutting through the static. He'd heard it before, years ago, when he'd done contract work at the old Riverside transfer station. The freight lines there ran on a specific schedule, hauling cargo for logistics companies that moved goods across state lines. Logistics companies like Armitage Freight Holdings. Henry looked up at the interview room where Evelyn sat with her lawyers, orchestrating the return of 3 little girls she claimed to love. And he thought about a mother hiding at a train station, scared and alone, begging a stranger to protect her daughters from the woman who should have protected them all. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked toward the exit. The CPS supervisor called after him. Mr. Luovano, we still need your full statement. I'll be back, Henry said. But first, he had a train station to find. Carla Reyes was 28, 3 years into Child Protective Services, and had the kind of sharp eyes that caught what everyone else missed. She found Henry in the station parking lot, leaning against his truck, replaying the voicemail for the 4th time. You're not going home either, she said. It wasn't a question. Henry looked up. Those hospital bracelets on the girls. Different facilities, different dates. That mean anything to you? Carla's expression shifted, something clicking into place. I thought it was odd. Same patients, but the billing codes came from separate insurance networks. Like someone was deliberately spreading their medical records across multiple systems. To hide something? Or to obscure ownership? She pulled out her tablet, fingers moving fast across the screen. Give me 10 minutes. It took 7. She found it buried in billing metadata, a shell company listed as the guarantor for all 3 hospital visits. Armitage Biotech Logistics, a subsidiary of Armitage Freight Holdings. Each discharge summary referenced a case number that led to another file, then another, until Carla pulled up a document that made Henry's blood run cold. Project Triad Protocol. Embryo designations 47A, 47B, 47C. Proprietary gestation contracts. Ownership transferred to ABL upon successful live births. Jesus, Carla whispered. They're not just her granddaughters. According to this paperwork, they're company assets. Henry stared at the screen, at the clinical language that reduced 3 little girls to inventory. Can she actually do that? Legally? She did it 10 years ago when biotech regulations were basically the Wild West. Whether it's enforceable now? Carla shook her head. That's a courtroom nightmare. But if Evelyn believes she owns them, then Marina ran because she knew her mother would take them back. Henry straightened, decision crystallizing. The voicemail. There was a freight train in the background. 2 long blasts, 1 short, 1 long. Riverside transfer? That's what I'm thinking. Carla looked back toward the precinct, where Evelyn's lawyers were still working their magic. If we find Marina before they do, she can testify. But we need to move now. Once those custody papers clear, they'll disappear, Henry finished. Just like the records. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the cracked parking lot of Riverside Transfer Station, a freight hub that had seen better decades. Trains rumbled past on rusted tracks, their horns echoing across empty platforms. The passenger terminal had closed years ago, but the cargo operation still ran around the clock, moving shipments for companies like Armitage across state lines. Henry scanned the building. Vending machines lined one wall near the old ticket windows, their lights flickering weakly in the dim station. There, Carla said quietly. Behind the last machine, partially hidden by shadow, was a woman in her early 30s. Dark hair tangled and unwashed, jeans torn at the knee, one wrist wrapped in medical tape where something had been ripped away. She looked up as they approached, her body tensing like a cornered animal. Marina? Henry kept his voice low, non-threatening. My name is Henry. I found your daughters this morning. Her eyes widened, fear and hope colliding. Are they safe? They're at the police station. Your mother's there with lawyers trying to take them. Marina's face crumpled. No, she can't. I left them in public because she stopped, fighting for control. I knew someone kind would stop. I knew cameras would record it. I needed witnesses, people who'd ask questions before she could make them vanish into some private facility. Carla crouched beside her, showing her CPS credentials. Marina, we found the Triad Protocol files. We know what your mother tried to do. Tried? Marina laughed bitterly. She did it. She paid doctors to create those embryos using her genetic material and a donor she handpicked. Then she contracted surrogates through her subsidiary and took custody the moment they were born. My daughters are classified as intellectual property in her system. But you're their mother, Henry said. Biologically? No. Legally? Barely. She let me raise them as long as I followed her rules. Private schools, private doctors, no public records. But when I tried to take them and leave, she activated a corporate retrieval clause. That's what those security people are. Repo men for children she thinks she owns. A train horn sounded, that same pattern Henry had heard on the voicemail. 2 long, 1 short, 1 long. Marina flinched. They track shipments through here. She'll know I've been hiding near her freight lines. She'll send people. As if summoned, headlights swept across the parking lot. 2 black sedans, moving too fast, too purposeful. Back entrance, Carla said sharply, grabbing Marina's arm. Now! They ran through the old terminal, footsteps echoing off cracked tile. Behind them, car doors slammed. Men's voices called out, professional and cold. Marina Armitage, we're here to escort you to medical evaluation. Medical evaluation. Pretty words for disappearing someone. Henry turned at the station's rear exit. Go, I'll slow them down. Henry, go! Carla pulled Marina through the door just as two men in dark suits rounded the corner. Henry stepped into their path, arms crossed, looking every bit the blue-collar worker who'd spent a lifetime standing his ground. She doesn't want to go with you, he said. The lead man didn't slow. Step aside. This is a private family matter. Funny. That's what your boss said at the precinct, right before I refused to sign her NDA. The man's hand moved toward his jacket. Not for a weapon, Henry realized, but for a phone. Calling for backup. Calling for instructions. Henry had maybe 60 seconds before this got worse. Then sirens split the air. 2 police cruisers and an unmarked CPS vehicle screamed into the lot, lights flashing red and blue across the station's walls. Carla had called it in the moment they'd left the precinct, backup already en route. The men in suits froze, caught between orders and consequences. An officer stepped out, hand on his holster. Everyone stays exactly where they are. In the chaos of shouted instructions and badge displays, Henry slipped around the building to where Carla waited with Marina. The older woman was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for stopping." Henry thought about 3 little girls on a bench at dawn, taught to be quiet and invisible. Thought about a mother desperate enough to leave them in public view, betting everything on the kindness of strangers. "You did the brave thing," he said. "Now let's finish it." By the time they returned to the precinct, news vans had multiplied like weeds. Someone had leaked the story, fragments of the Triad Protocol spreading across social media faster than Evelyn's lawyers could contain it. Billionaire heiress surfaces. After embryo experiment scandal. CEO. Accused of treating granddaughters as corporate assets. Armitage Holdings. Stock plummets amid ethics probe. Inside, Evelyn Armitage stood before a hastily arranged press conference. Every camera in the city pointed at her face. Her expression was stone, but Henry saw cracks forming around the edges. "I'm calling this conference," she began, "to correct misinformation and address these serious allegations directly." Henry stood in the back with Marina and Carla, watching a billionaire realize that some messes couldn't be cleaned up with money or lawyers or non-disclosure agreements. Only with truth. And truth, Henry had learned, was the one thing people like Evelyn Armitage feared most. The conference room was too bright, the lights rigged for cameras that broadcast to millions. Evelyn Armitage stood behind a podium bearing the Armitage Holdings logo. Her silver hair perfect, her gray suit pressed sharp enough to cut. Every detail choreographed, every word meant to have been scripted for damage control. Henry watched from the back row beside Marina, who clutched a tissue in white-knuckled hands. Carla stood nearby, along with 3 police officers and a family court advocate. They'd come expecting denials, lawyers spinning truth into something more palatable. What they got instead was a woman stepping off a cliff. Evelyn looked straight into the camera, and for the first time since Henry had met her, she looked small. "My name is Evelyn Armitage," she began, her voice steady but stripped of its earlier armor. "I am here to confess to actions that were legal, profitable, and morally bankrupt." The room went silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. 10 years ago, my daughter, Marina, struggled with infertility. Modern medicine offered solutions, but I wanted more than solutions. I wanted control, perfection, legacy. She paused, jaw tight. I funded a private biotech initiative called the Triad Protocol. Using my genetic material and a vetted donor, we created 3 embryos, gestated through contracted surrogates, and classified the resulting children as intellectual property of Armitage Biotech Logistics. Someone in the press corps gasped. Murmurs rippled through the room. It was legal, Evelyn continued. Barely regulated. Industry standard in certain circles. But legality does not equal humanity. I created 3 human beings and treated them like assets. I allowed my daughter to raise them under conditions that amounted to corporate surveillance. And when she tried to take them and leave I activated retrieval protocols designed for cargo, not children. Marina's hand found Henry's arm, gripping tight. I told myself it was about protection, about ensuring their futures. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I wanted ownership. I wanted proof that wealth could engineer even family itself. Evelyn's voice cracked, just slightly. And when a janitor named Henry Luavano found my granddaughters abandoned on a park bench, scared and alone, he did what I should have done from the beginning. He told the truth. He refused payment. He refused silence. He stayed. The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment Evelyn Armitage's empire began to crumble under the weight of 3 words. We were wrong. She let the words settle, then continued. If you ever doubt the importance of ordinary courage, remember the man in coveralls who wouldn't look away. Remember the CPS investigator who followed the thread when everyone else wanted it buried. Remember the mother who left her children in public view because she trusted strangers more than she trusted me. Evelyn reached beneath the podium and produced a folder, holding it up for the cameras. Effective immediately, Armitage Biotech Logistics is dissolved. All associated contracts are voided. I am establishing a $3 billion endowment for the Foundlings Fund, dedicated to protecting abandoned and exploited children worldwide. And I am petitioning the family court to grant joint guardianship of Francis, Carolyn, and Sharon to their mother Marina and to Henry Luavano, who saved them when I failed them. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Evelyn's legal team looked stricken. Her stock ticker, displayed on a screen to the side, began its free fall in real time. But Evelyn just walked away from the podium, past the chaos, straight to where Marina stood trembling. I'm sorry, Evelyn said quietly, and for once there were no lawyers to soften it, no contracts to contain it. Just 2 words that cost everything. Marina didn't answer. Not yet. Maybe not for years, but she didn't walk away either. That was something. 3 months later, the park looked like it always had. Joggers circled the paths. Sprinklers hissed across the grass. The bench where Henry had first seen 3 little girls sat empty in the morning light, ordinary and unremarkable. Henry spread a blanket nearby while his son, Miguel, helped Francis, Carolyn, and Sharon unpack the red suitcase, now repurposed as a picnic box. Inside were sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, grapes like small jewels, juice boxes, and a sleeve of chocolate chip cookies. Marina sat beside Henry, quieter than she used to be, but steadier too. Therapy and distance from her mother's empire had given her space to breathe. They're doing better, she said, watching the girls argue over who got which sandwich. Kids are resilient, Henry replied. Doesn't mean they won't carry scars. But yeah, they're doing better. A black town car pulled up to the curb, and Henry tensed instinctively. But the woman who emerged was different from the one who'd arrived with lawyers and threats. Evelyn Armitage wore jeans and a simple blouse. No entourage. No armor. She carried a canvas bag that looked worn with use. Francis saw her first. "Grandma's here." The words still sounded tentative, like they were all still figuring out what it meant. Evelyn approached slowly, respecting the boundaries the court had set. Supervised visits. No corporate contact, no control, only connection. "I brought books," she said, pulling paperbacks from the bag. "I thought maybe we could read together." Sharon took one carefully, examining the cover. A story about dragons and brave girls. "You'll read it to us? If you'd like." "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. While Evelyn settled on the blanket with the girls, Henry opened the suitcase to grab napkins. Taped inside the lid was a note he'd written weeks ago. Words his wife had taught him and he'd promised to pass on. "If you're scared, find the helpers. If you're a helper, stop." Marina read it over his shoulder, smiling faintly. "Think they'll remember it?" "I think they already know it," Henry said. "They just needed someone to show them it was true." The morning stretched on, filled with the small sounds of family being rebuilt from broken pieces. Laughter and questions and the rustle of pages turning. Miguel and the triplets flew a kite that dipped and soared against the blue sky, its tail streaming like hope made visible. Evelyn read in a voice that shook occasionally, but didn't stop. Marina watched her daughters with eyes that no longer carried the weight of running. And Henry sat with his hands folded, thinking about the morning he'd almost kept walking. Almost. But didn't. Across the park, a jogger passed the bench without looking. A dog walker hurried by. The security camera on the light pole blinked its steady red light, recording everything and nothing, just like it had 3 months ago when 3 little girls sat alone in the rain. The bench was the same. The morning light was, too. But this time, no one was waiting to be found. They were already home,